So recently, there has been a lot of news coverage about how amazing and advanced Chinese EVs or electric cars are. And the question I've been asking myself is, if Chinese EVs are so good, why aren't they dominating globally and being sold everywhere outside of China? So if we dig in a little deeper, yeah, it looks like the majority of global EV sales come from China alone, which accounts for almost 2/3 of global EV sales. If you take China out of the equation, then Chinese brands represent a much smaller fraction of EV sales, well below 10%. Just take a look at this chart that shows how much market share Chinese EVs have in most Western countries. Of course, China is a massive market, so it's no small feat for these Chinese EV makers to compete with all other foreign car brands and other gas cars and still sell so many EVs in China. As a matter of fact, the Chinese market share for EVs, which include battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids, is officially at parity with traditional gas cars. Industry analysts even project EVs to outsell gasoline-only cars in China for the entire year of 2025, marking a historic shift. So these Chinese EV companies must be making one hell of a technologically advanced product. And honestly, from what I've seen online, they do seem pretty cool. I mean, how many EVs out there can literally jump over a pothole the way BYD Yangwang U9 can, or impress top American streamer Speed with its bouncing and dancing ability?
Chinese cars in China crazy, yo!
They've certainly come a long way from the days when they were getting written off by everyone. Remember when Elon Musk just laughed off the competition from BYD?
Although there's competitors now ramping up, and as you're familiar with BYD, why do you laugh? BYD is trying to compete. Why do you laugh?
Have you seen their car?
You don't see them at all as a competitor?
No.
Why is that? I mean, they offer a lower price point.
I don't think they have a great product.
To be fair, this was when Tesla first entered China in 2013, and it looked like Tesla was going to dominate. The Model S was the only premium EV anyone wanted, and Tesla sold nearly 5,000 cars in China alone in 2014. But fast forward to 2024, the picture looked very different, with Tesla barely holding on to a market share of 6%. Elon Musk even acknowledged that Chinese car companies are so good that if there are no trade barriers, they'll pretty much demolish most other car companies in the world. There's a magic word right there, trade barriers. And we'll come back to that. But first, let's take a look at how all these Chinese car companies became so good so quickly that they're now projected to outsell traditional gas cars in China this year. Let's start with how Chinese EV makers actually got off the ground. You can't really talk about this without first mentioning the market leader BYD, now the biggest EV maker in the world. BYD, which stands for Build Your Dream, was founded in 1995 by a man named Wang Chuanfu. His story is actually pretty inspirational. He grew up really poor as an orphan, studied chemistry, and with about $300,000 he borrowed from a relative, he started a tiny battery shop in Shenzhen with 20 employees. Fast forward a few years, in 2003, Wang makes this crazy move. He buys a failing state-owned car company for about $30 million. How? Well, BYD had already become one of the largest rechargeable battery makers in China. So Wang convinced investors and banks that if they could make the world's best batteries, they could also make cars powered by those batteries. It was a bold pitch, but it worked. He got the financing and jumped into cars almost overnight. The problem was, BYD had no real experience building cars. So what do? They just started reverse engineering second-hand Toyotas, Hondas, Volkswagens, you name it.
拿了很多全球的好车嘛，拆嘛，然后学习嘛，然后高度的垂直整合嘛，最敬佩的就是丰田，它的工艺啊，它的设计啊，它的产品啊，确实要学习他们，然后才能站在它的肩膀上。
And then you've got Tesla. In 2014, Elon Musk famously announced Tesla was open sourcing all its EV patents and that Tesla would not sue anyone who in good faith wants to use our technology. So, of course, Chinese EV startups absolutely seized on this opportunity. Companies like Xiaopin and NIO studied Tesla's designs, borrowed what they could, and then iterated really fast. But copying was the only first chapter. What really changed the game was what happened after that. Unlike Tesla or Toyota, which rely on hundreds of outside suppliers, BYD decided it would make almost everything itself. The batteries, the chips, and the motors. Today, they even make semiconductors and their own shipping fleet, which is insane. But it's also why BYD is so efficient. They cut out middlemen, lower costs, and can scale way faster than anyone else. It means BYD can cut costs dramatically and ramp up production way faster than its competitors. How much faster? Industry analysts estimate BYD can bring a new car model from concept to mass production in about 18 to 24 months. For comparison, traditional Western automakers usually takes 3 to 4 years to roll out a new model. That speed, combined with lower costs, gives BYD a huge competitive edge. And it worked. In 2024, BYD sold over 4.2 million vehicles, generating more than $100 billion in sales, and officially passed Tesla in revenue. In China alone, they now own about 1/3 of the EV market, while Tesla has been stuck at around 6%. That's a stunning reversal of fortune. But here is the bigger point. BYD isn't the only story. Pretty much the entire Chinese EV industry figured out how to make cars for the masses, not just for the elites. In the US, Tesla's cheapest car still costs around $35,000. In China, you've got options starting as low as a few $1,000s. For example, BYD's Seagull comes in under $10,000, and it offers up to 250 miles of range, fast charging, and even a rotating iPad-style touchscreen. But then you've also got the Wuling Mini EV made by a joint venture between GM and SAIC. That car starts at around $5,000 and became one of the best-selling cars in the entire country, especially in smaller cities. So how are they this cheap? This is probably the most obvious one: labor. A car factory worker in China might make around $3 an hour, which is only about 8% of what a unionized auto worker in the US makes. And this gap really matters in the auto industry because building cars is still very labor intensive. It's not just robots, it's armies of people doing assembly, quality control, and logistics. BYD alone employs over 900,000 people. In the West, that kind of headcount would be financially impossible. On top of lower wages, Chinese workers typically put in longer hours with fewer legacy costs like pensions and healthcare obligations that weigh down companies in the US or Europe. Put simply, Western automakers are dragging around decades of expensive labor contracts. Chinese automakers aren't. And suddenly, owning an EV wasn't just for wealthy city elites. It became something millions of middle-class families across China could actually afford. That shift is what pushed EVs into the mainstream so quickly. But because so many startups entered the space at once, companies like NIO, Xiaopin, Li Auto, and Zeekr, the competition got absolutely brutal. At one point, there were more than 200 EV brands in China. Most of them are gone now. Some flamed out in spectacular fashion. Byton, once hyped as a Tesla killer with futuristic dashboards, raised nearly $1.5 billion, but couldn't even get a single production car into the mass market. Employees went months without pay, and the company shut down in 2020. Even tech giants weren't immune. Baidu's joint venture, GUN Auto, ran out of cash in late 2024, and things got so bad that employees stormed the office to demand back pay.
公司
不是给扫码呀？我几千个家庭都搁这等着你了。
为什么我们这几个月销量这么好，形势一变大好，为什么就会变成这样子？
今天还待在吉悦的工区继续要账，在这边已经待了1天1夜了。整个工区有员工，有车主，有供应商， 大家都在这熬着，要一个说法，要一个结果。
And then there's Tesla. In 2023, Tesla slashed prices in China by up to 20% just to keep pace. And that triggered a nationwide price war. Overnight, other brands had to cut prices too, or risk going bankrupt. Some Tesla customers who had bought cars just weeks earlier were so angry at the sudden price cuts that they protested at Tesla showrooms demanding refunds. For Chinese consumers, this was great. EVs got cheaper almost overnight. But for the automakers, it was a bloodbath. Dozens of brands disappeared. Billions of dollars went up in smoke, and the only strongest survived. The survivors, BYD, NIO, Xiaopin, Li Auto, came out leaner, faster, and even more innovative. And part of how they survived was adding features that no one else thought of. You've got cars with giant rotating touchscreens that let you watch TikTok or Bilibili while charging. Karaoke systems with built-in mics and speakers. Full body massage seats in mid-range models. And then there is NIO's battery swap, which I think is pretty innovative. Instead of waiting 30 minutes at a fast charger, you just pull into a swap station, and in about 3 minutes, your empty battery gets replaced with a fully charged one. Boom, you're back on the road. NIO says they've already done over 30 million battery swaps in China, and owners swear by it. So why isn't everyone doing this? Well, battery swap stations are expensive to build and require standardization. All your models have to be designed around the same battery packs. That's a tough commitment for most automakers. Tesla even tested battery swapping once in California, but gave up because hardly anyone used it. NIO, on the other hand, doubled down and made it a core part of their brand. It's a perfect example of how Chinese EV makers are willing to try bold ideas that Western companies often dismiss as too complicated or risky. And sometimes those risks pay off. But here's the thing. Companies, no matter how innovative or scrappy they are, don't grow this fast in a vacuum. Behind all of this, there had to have been another force shaping the industry from the outside. And that is the Chinese government. China's EV story isn't just about competition or cool tech features. It's also political. For President Xi Jinping, EVs are what some people call a face project. It's not just about selling cars, it's about proving that China's system can outperform the West. Just like South Korea once used Hyundai and Kia to symbolize its economic miracle, China wants BYD, NIO, and Xiaopin to stand as proof that its model of state-led planning and subsidies is the future. Since 2009, the Chinese government has poured in over $200 billion to push EV adoption. The subsidies were so generous that they created perverse incentives. Some companies churned out these tiny, low-range compliance EVs purely to qualify for subsidies, many of which ended up abandoned in so-called EV graveyards. And in one infamous case, a company called Salian pocketed 6.6 billion yuan, which is literally over $900 million in subsidies without ever producing a real car. Now, you might be thinking, yeah, but every government subsidizes EVs, right? True, but not at China's scale. Western subsidies look tiny in comparison. Germany canceled their subsidies in 2023, and the UK scrapped them in 2022. And while the US still has tax credits on their Inflation Reduction Act, they're modest compared to China's. And later, we'll talk about how the US under Trump is actually shifting back to subsidizing gas cars. But China went much further than subsidies. They actively bailed out companies and imposed mandates. In 2020, the city of Hefei invested 7 billion yuan, which is around $980 million, into NIO, taking a 24% stake and literally saving it from bankruptcy. And in Shenzhen, officials ordered the entire city bus fleet to switch to BYD electric buses. Then there was the dual credit system, which was the real game changer. Here's how it worked. Every automaker in China had to meet two government targets. The first was CAFC credits, which stands for Corporate Average Fuel Consumption. Basically, that's just fuel efficiency. The second was New Energy Vehicle credits, or NEV credits, meaning EVs and plug-in hybrids. So, if your lineup was full of gas guzzlers, you got hit with negative CAFC points, and the only way to balance it out was by earning New Energy Vehicle credits, which you only got by selling EVs and plug-ins. So each automaker had to earn enough NEV credits from, again, selling EVs or plug-in hybrids to equal a percentage of their total gas car production. The quota started at 10% in 2019, went up to 18% by 2023, and it's set to keep rising every year. So if you didn't hit that target, you had two choices. Buy credits from rivals like BYD or Tesla, or face limits on how many gas cars you are even allowed to sell. So this wasn't just an incentive program, it was a penalty system. Build EVs or pay your competitors. And this is one of the big reasons foreign automakers like Toyota, Ford, Hyundai, Volkswagen started losing ground. Their lineups were still dominated by gas cars. That meant either rushing EVs to market at huge cost or literally handing money over to BYD and Tesla by buying credits. Competing in China suddenly became a lot more expensive, and many foreign brands simply couldn't keep pace. But subsidies and credits were only part of the picture. The Chinese government had another weapon, one of the most underrated yet powerful policies, the license plate system. Here is something I didn't know until I really dug into it. In big cities like Shanghai or Beijing, buying a car isn't enough. You also need a license plate. And since the early 2000s, the government has deliberately made plates scarce and expensive as a way to fight two big problems: pollution and congestion. Shanghai was the first to do it, introducing a monthly auction system back in 2000. Every month, hundreds of thousands of people bid for a limited number of plates. In one case, 200,000 people were competing for just 10,000 plates. The average winning bid, around 88,000 yuan, which is around $14,000 to $15,000. That's crazy, meaning your plate alone might cost more than the gas car you buy. Beijing went even further in 2011. Instead of auctions, they introduced a lottery. But here's the catch. Unless you win, you simply cannot get a plate for a new gas car, period. And the odds of hitting the lottery dropped in recent years below 0.2%. That's 1 in 500. Some people have been applying for years, even close to a decade, without ever getting lucky. If you don't win, your gas car just sits in the garage. But what if you bought an EV? All of that pain disappeared. You could just walk into a BYD dealership, buy an EV, and have a plate issued right away. For average Chinese families, the math wasn't hard. Do I really want to spend extra $15,000 to $20,000? Or do I buy an EV and start driving tomorrow? Honestly, this single policy may have done more to push EV adoption in China than any subsidy or tax break. By the way, here's what I keep wondering. Did the whole EV mandate actually solve the problems it was meant to solve? Because think about it. By handing out unlimited EV plates, the government may have simply added more cars back on the already packed streets. During holidays like Chinese New Year, highways out of Shanghai and Beijing get so jammed that some people have reported being stuck for over 24 hours. EV or not, that's not fixing congestion. And here's what it gets even trickier. EVs are supposed to be zero emission, but that's only true at the tailpipe. You also have to factor in the electricity needed to charge them. So the more EVs on the road, the more electricity we need to generate. And then there is the battery itself. Building one takes a crazy amount of energy. Mining and refining raw materials like lithium, cobalt, and nickel, and then assembling them into cells burns through a ton of electricity before the car even hits the road. So if you look at the whole life cycle of emissions, from building that battery to driving the car to charging it every night, the picture gets a lot more complicated. In China, about 60% of all that power still comes from burning coal. And according to Bloomberg NEF, it takes around 118,000 kilometers or 73,000 miles before an EV actually breaks even on carbon emissions compared to a gas car. That's a lot of driving. And if your battery dies early or the grid doesn't clean up fast enough, the green benefit might not be as clean as it sounds. Look, either way, the bottom line is this. Yes, Chinese EV makers had to compete and innovate like crazy to survive. And they did give consumers exactly what they wanted, often better than foreign brands could. But at the end of the day, it was these big government-level policies that really pushed millions of Chinese people to go electric. Which raises the bigger question. Is China's EV boom really the result of pure innovation, or is it a subsidized bubble that cannot survive once it leaves home turf? At home, the model has clearly worked. China went from basically zero EVs to the largest EV market in the world in just over a decade. But once Chinese EVs leave home turf, they face tariffs, consumer skepticism, and governments that don't play by Beijing's rules. It's a whole different ballgame. To be fair, Chinese EVs are selling well in many parts of the world, including major European countries like the UK, Germany, and France. But globally outside of China, Chinese EV brands still represent a much smaller fraction of EV sales, well below 10%. And as of 2025, Chinese EV makers have virtually zero market share in the United States, which can be attributed to a number of factors. First, tariffs and anti-subsidy duties. Let's say that Chinese EVs are in fact world-class from the product and tech standpoint, but cost literally half the price of any other EVs on the market. You would think that global consumers would at least want to check them out, right? Well, what if the moment a Chinese EV enters the US market, it immediately doubles in price? That's what tariffs do. A tariff is basically a tax on imported goods. Normally, US tariffs on imported passenger cars, think Toyota or Volkswagen, are only around 2.5%. But Chinese EVs were already under a special 25% tariff from the earlier US-China trade war, and in 2024, the previous Biden administration quadrupled that to 100%. This was on the basis that Chinese EV makers were benefiting from massive state subsidies and unfair practices that made their cars artificially cheaper, and that they couldn't allow unfair subsidized Chinese vehicles to undercut American jobs. Then in 2025, the Trump administration not only kept Biden's 100% tariff, but went even further. They specifically targeted Chinese EV batteries and critical materials like graphite, slapping on new tariffs as high as 93.5%. Layered on top, that pushed the effective tariffs rate on Chinese EVs to around 145%. Similarly, the European Union imposed definitive anti-subsidy duties on Chinese EVs in late 2024 after an 8-month investigation concluded that Chinese automakers were benefiting from unfair government subsidies. Are you seeing a pattern here with all these anti-subsidy measures? For top Chinese EV makers like BYD, that means facing up to 27% additional duties when selling in Europe. Okay, that's not nearly as extreme as the US, and they can still compete thanks to their super low cost base, but only with much thinner margins. Of course, China has challenged both the US and EU measures at the World Trade Organization, calling them protectionism in disguise. But so far, none of them looks ready to back down. If anything, the EU has warned that it could hike duties even further if new evidence of subsidies turns up. So the irony is the very subsidies that gave Chinese EV companies their edge at home are now backfiring overseas. What was once their biggest advantage has become their biggest liability. Even if Chinese EV makers somehow got past the tariffs, there's another wall that's even harder and almost impossible to climb: national security. Cars today aren't just cars anymore, right? They're basically rolling smartphones. They've got cameras, microphones, GPS, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, even entertainment systems that are always online. And all that tech is consistently collecting data: where you drive, what's around you, and sometimes even audio and video recordings. Now, here's the problem. Under the Chinese national intelligence law, companies, or I should say Chinese companies, are required to cooperate with the government if asked. That's why, from the US perspective, a Chinese-made EV isn't just a cheaper competitor, it's a potential Trojan horse on wheels. Imagine millions of connected cars on American roads, each with sensors and microphones, and the possibility, whether real or perceived, that Beijing could access that data. That's why the US has gone far beyond tariffs and imposed an outright ban on Chinese connected vehicles. Here is how it works. Starting with the 2027 model year, Chinese-linked software in connected vehicles will be banned. By 2030, the ban extends to hardware as well. And this is not just about BYD or NIO. If American car companies like Ford or Tesla use Chinese-made chips, sensors, or software in their connected systems, they'll have to rip them out or risk losing access to the US market. What if Chinese car companies say, fine, you know what? We'll just build a factory in the US or Mexico if you can't trust us. Even then, if the tech inside the car has a sufficient nexus to China, it's banned, no matter where the car is assembled. So what does sufficient nexus to China even mean? And how do you prove it? If you watched the TikTok Senate hearing, you will remember US lawmakers grilling TikTok's Singaporean CEO over whether data was being sent back to China. The CEO denied it, but the reality is it's nearly impossible to prove one way or the other. The US government's position is simple. Why take the risk at all when the data could be exploited for espionage? This is the same logic the US used to ban Huawei from 5G networks or DJI drones from the government contracts. And here's the irony. China could argue this is unfair, and maybe they'll try to work out a deal with Trump in the future. But the fact is, China itself doesn't fully trust foreign EVs either. As early as 2021, Tesla cars were banned from Chinese military bases and some government compounds because officials worried that the cameras in Teslas could record sensitive information. So the US doesn't trust Chinese EVs, and China doesn't fully trust American ones either. So for the foreseeable future, it's safe to say no Chinese passenger car brand will legally make it onto American roads, not just because of tariffs, but because they are being treated as a national security threat. So at the end of the day, the big question is this: who actually owns the future of cars on a global scale? Are we going to see Chinese EVs everywhere? Or will the road still be dominated by traditional gas cars from the US, Germany, Japan, and Korea? On paper, it feels hard to imagine the majority of the consumers going back to gas once they've experienced a state-of-the-art EV. Many of my friends who drive Teslas swear by them. Like, they say once you've seen the future, you just can't go back to driving a regular engine car. And if full self-driving mode really takes off and robo-taxi starts operating at scale, it's easy to picture demand tilting even more towards EVs. And if that happens, China, with its sheer production numbers and cheaper, feature-packed models, seems pretty well positioned to dominate. At the same time, America actually seems to be heading in the opposite direction, rolling back EV mandates and doubling down on gas and hybrids. By September 2025, the The federal EV purchase credits, those $7,500 tax breaks that made Teslas and other EVs so much more affordable, are set to expire. That means American consumers are now effectively being nudged back towards gas cars and hybrids. So we are left with this strange global split. China is going all in on EV. The US and Japan are leaning back into gas and hybrids. Europe, somewhere in between, is trying to regulate EV adoptions with tariffs and subsidies. Look, whichever side you're betting on, one thing is clear. The future of cars isn't just about cars and innovation alone. It's about geopolitics and who has the power to set the rules of the road. Now, personally, I don't have skin in the game. I like both, a good old-fashioned gas car and a cutting-edge EV. But here's one observation that I keep coming back to. No matter which way the world leans, both gas cars and EVs will demand more energy. And that leads to the real question nobody seems to want to answer. Where is all that extra energy going to come from? And more importantly, can we actually afford it? Hope you found this long explainer helpful. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Asian Boss. And let me know in the comments what other Asia-related topics you'd like me to go in-depth on. It could be about tech, culture, or business, whatever. We do our best to do deep research and cover all sides as accurately as possible. But if you think I missed something, do let me know in the comments or even reach out to me directly on X or on Instagram. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay curious.